The HOA president was standing at the front of the meeting room, smiling like she had just won an award. Then I dropped a folder on the table. The room went completely silent. Karen Whitmore looked at me and said, "What is that?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Then another. And another. Financial records. Landscaping invoices. Violation notices. Parking fees. Internal emails. Karen's smile disappeared. 3 months earlier, nobody in our neighborhood would have believed she was hiding anything. We thought she was simply obsessed with rules. Then she introduced more than 50 new regulations almost overnight. No children playing in front yards. No sidewalk chalk. No wandering cats. No excessive barking. And if your guests parked on the street for more than an hour, you owed the HOA $20. At first, we thought she was just controlling. We were wrong. Because those ridiculous rules weren't the real problem. They were only the beginning. And that night, I was about to show the entire neighborhood the secret Karen had worked very hard to hide. 3 months earlier, our neighborhood was the kind of place people bragged about living in. It wasn't perfect, but that's what made it feel like home. Kids rode their bikes between driveways. Parents sat on front porches in the evenings. Dogs barked at passing cars, cats wandered through yards, and nobody thought twice about a little sidewalk chalk. On weekends, neighbors grilled burgers, exchanged tools, and helped each other with yard work. The HOA existed, but most of us barely noticed it. Our previous president, Mark, was strict about serious things like broken fences, abandoned vehicles, or major construction without approval. But he wasn't interested in controlling every little thing we did. Then Mark announced he was retiring. That's when Karen Whitmore entered the picture. She was a middle-aged woman who always dressed professionally and spoke with the confidence of someone who believed she already had every answer. During her campaign, Karen promised one thing repeatedly. "I'll protect your property values." People liked that. She talked about cleaner streets, better landscaping, and a more organized community. Even I voted for her. Looking back, that might have been the biggest mistake we ever made. Because Karen didn't just want to improve our neighborhood. She wanted to completely control it. And none of us realized how quickly everything was about to change. Karen had barely been president for 2 weeks when the first envelope arrived. It wasn't a newsletter. It wasn't an invitation to a community meeting. It was a 47-page document titled, Updated Community Standards. I remember standing in my kitchen, flipping through it and laughing. At first, I thought it had to be a joke. It wasn't. There were more than 50 new rules. Some were reasonable. Most were completely ridiculous. Cats were no longer allowed to wander outside without supervision. Dogs could not bark excessively, although the document never explained what excessive meant. Children were prohibited from playing in front yards unless an adult was present. Sidewalk chalk was banned because it supposedly created an uncontrolled visual environment. Outdoor toys had to be stored out of sight before sunset. Garage doors couldn't remain open longer than 30 minutes. Holiday decorations had strict installation and removal dates. Even certain plants were suddenly considered inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetics. But then we reached the parking rules. If a guest parked in front of your house for more than 1 hour, the homeowner could receive a $20 fee. $20. For having someone visit. And every rule came with a warning system. First violation, written notice. Second violation, fine. Repeated violation, additional fines and possible legal action. Within days, the neighborhood changed. People stopped letting their children play outside. Neighbors started apologizing before visiting each other. Dogs were kept indoors. Even casual gatherings became stressful because everyone was watching the clock. Then the fines started arriving. One neighbor received $50 because his dog barked when a delivery driver approached. Another was fined $100 because 2 flower pots were visible from the street. A mother received a warning because her children had drawn a chalk sun on the sidewalk. Karen defended every rule at the next HOA meeting. These standards protect everyone's property values, she said. Nobody wanted to argue with her. But there was one detail that bothered me. Almost every new rule had one thing in common. A violation meant money. And suddenly, our HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. It was collecting them. Within a few weeks, our neighborhood barely felt like the place I had moved into. The streets were still clean. The lawns looked perfect. But something was missing. People. Kids stopped playing outside because their parents were afraid of another warning letter. Dogs were kept indoors for hours at a time. Neighbors stopped dropping by without calling first. Even weekend gatherings became complicated. One Saturday, my sister came to visit. She parked across the street because my driveway was already full. Less than an hour later, there was a bright yellow notice under her windshield wiper. Unauthorized guest parking. I checked the time. She hadn't even been there 50 minutes. I took the notice to the HOA office and asked Karen what was going on. She barely looked up from her computer. The rule is clearly stated, she said. Your guest should have moved the vehicle. It hadn't even been an hour. Karen smiled. Then you should consider yourself lucky. That sentence stayed with me. Lucky? We were paying hundreds of dollars every month in HOA dues, yet we were being treated like trespassers in our own neighborhood. The community Facebook group became a battlefield. Every day someone posted a new violation. A barking dog. A chalk drawing. A lawn ornament. A visiting relative. But something else was happening too. The HOA's income was rising. Fast. Every violation came with a fine. Every appeal required another fee. And every week, Karen announced another community improvement. That's when I started wondering something I couldn't shake. If all these rules were really about protecting property values, why did they seem so profitable? My name is Daniel Carter, and numbers have always made more sense to me than people. I spent 30 years working as an accountant, so when everyone else was arguing about Karen's ridiculous rules, I did something different. I started counting. I created a spreadsheet on my laptop and entered every violation I could verify. Date. Address. Reason. Fine. I didn't rely on rumors. I used photographs, copies of notices, and screenshots from the neighborhood group. After 6 weeks, I had recorded more than 200 violations. Then I calculated the fines. The number made me sit back in my chair. Nearly $30,000 had been collected from residents in less than 2 months. And that didn't include HOA dues. I went back through previous financial reports. The difference was enormous. Under the previous president, violations were occasional. Under Karen, they had become an industry. But the money wasn't the only strange thing. I noticed a pattern in the community improvement projects. Trees were suddenly being removed. Landscaping contracts were being approved. Residents were being pressured to replace plants, repair fences, repaint homes, and make other aesthetic improvements. And one landscaping company seemed to be getting work over and over again. Whitmore Property Services. The name stopped me cold. Whitmore. That was Karen's last name. I checked the company registration. Then I checked the HOA meeting minutes. Then I checked the contractor payments. The more I looked, the stranger it became. But I still didn't have proof that Karen was personally benefiting. So I kept digging. Because if my suspicion was wrong, I wanted to know. And if I was right, I wanted to know exactly how deep it went. I spent the next 3 nights going through every public record I could find. I checked the state's business registry first. Whitmore Property Services was registered to a man named Richard Whitmore, Karen's husband. That changed everything. But a family connection wasn't proof of wrongdoing. Karen could still argue that the company had simply submitted the best bid. So I went back to the HOA records. That's when I found something that made my stomach drop. 3 days after Karen became president, the HOA board approved an $86,000 landscaping contract. The contractor? Whitmore Property Services. But there was no mention of Karen's relationship to the company anywhere in the meeting minutes. I kept reading. The contract included tree removal, landscaping replacements, sidewalk repairs, and visual compliance improvements. Suddenly, all those new rules made sense. The HOA had created dozens of reasons for homeowners to spend money improving their properties. And Karen's husband's company was being paid to perform some of that work. But there was something even stranger. I found an internal landscaping assessment from before Karen became president. It stated that most of the mature trees on our street were healthy and did not require removal. Yet after Karen took office, several of those trees were removed. The official explanation was community aesthetic improvement. Then I compared the invoices. The numbers didn't match. Some homeowners had paid separately for tree removal. The HOA had also paid the same contractor for similar work. In some cases, the descriptions were almost identical. I printed everything. But I knew Karen would have an explanation. So I needed something she couldn't simply talk her way around. I requested additional HOA financial records. At first, Karen's board refused. They claimed the documents contained confidential information. That was when I knew I had found something important. If everything was legitimate, why were they so desperate to keep the records hidden? I filed another request. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived at my house. And inside it was the document that finally connected everything. Not just the money. Not just the contracts. But the reason Karen had created so many rules in the first place. The envelope contained dozens of pages, but one document immediately caught my attention. It was an internal email from the HOA's management company. The email had been written shortly before Karen introduced the new rules. I read it twice. Then a third time. It said the board expected the new enforcement policies to significantly increase community revenue through compliance fees, corrective work, and approved vendor services. Approved vendor services. That phrase suddenly made sense. The rules weren't only about appearances. They were creating business. Every new violation could lead to a fine. Every property violation could require corrective work. And the corrective work could be performed by approved contractors. Then I found the number that made my hands go cold. Since Karen took office, the HOA had collected more than $147,000 in fines, fees, and related charges. A huge portion of the landscaping and exterior improvement payments had gone to Whitmore Property Services, Karen's husband's company. But there was one more document. A board communication discussing the guest parking rule. One sentence stood out. Residents are unlikely to challenge small fees consistently. I stared at that line for several seconds. $20 didn't sound like much. But multiplied across hundreds of households, those small fees became a serious source of income. Karen hadn't accidentally created a neighborhood full of fines. She had designed a system where breaking the rules made money. I printed every page. Then I called the neighbors I trusted most. That evening, 23 homeowners gathered in my garage. I put the first document on the wall. And for the first time, everyone understood what Karen had really been doing. The emergency HOA meeting was packed. Karen stood at the front of the room, looking completely confident. I understand there have been concerns, she said, but the board has acted within its authority. Then Daniel stood up. He placed a thick folder on the table. Did you disclose your relationship with Whitmore Property Services before approving the $86,000 contract? The room went silent. Karen's expression changed. That is completely irrelevant. Daniel opened the folder. Then you won't mind if everyone sees the financial records. He placed the invoices on the table. Then the internal email. Then the contractor registration showing the company belonged to her husband. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Karen tried to interrupt. "These documents are being misinterpreted." Daniel shook his head. "Then let an independent auditor interpret them." One homeowner stood. Then another. Within minutes, residents were demanding her resignation. For the first time since becoming president, Karen had nothing left to say. The investigation began within days. Karen was suspended as HOA president, and an independent auditor was brought in to examine the finances. The landscaping contract was immediately canceled. The board froze several questionable fines and began reviewing old violations. Residents who had been wrongly charged started receiving refunds. The $20 guest parking fee disappeared. So did the rules banning sidewalk chalk and children from playing outside. For the first time in months, nobody was afraid of opening their mailbox. The neighborhood was finally beginning to breathe again. A few weeks later, I sat on my front porch and watched the neighborhood slowly come back to life. Kids were drawing chalk pictures on the sidewalk again. Dogs barked at passing cars. Neighbors stopped by without checking the clock. Someone parked across the street to visit a friend, and nobody came outside carrying a violation notice. It felt normal again. But I learned something I'll never forget. The rules were never really about protecting our property values. They were about control, money, and making people too afraid to question the person holding the power. Karen thought she could control an entire neighborhood. She forgot one thing. People eventually compare notes. And once the truth comes out, even the strongest HOA can fall apart.